Hey, welcome back. For over 3 years, I've been working with people who were there and people who know about what really happened in Rendlesham Forest. Everything that I've learned in over 3 years of research points to the fact that it probably was an advanced weapons system test that went horribly wrong, injuring US service personnel. To understand who, what, where, when, and why, you need to understand the history of British directed energy weapons. My research reveals a direct timeline from the birth of radar through Rendlesham to advanced UAP technology. It's a big story. So today, let's bust some myths that you have been told in your history books about the birth of radar, because what you were told isn't the full story. And that's really how it all started. Germany was rebuilding its army against the Treaty of Versailles. Thousands of fighters and bombers that could be used for World War II. And Britain, as a plucky nation, had a few biplanes, a good idea with the Hurricane and the Spitfire, but there was no way that Britain could ever monitor its entire coastline from attack by enemy aircraft. You'd have to have aircraft in the air looking for bombers and fighters approaching Britain all the time. That wasn't going to happen. We had a number of airfields, mainly in the east of England, smart, because they faced the North Sea in Germany, and on the south coast of England, which was a far bigger problem, which I'll discuss in a minute. We needed to know when the enemy was coming. If we could know an enemy aircraft's speed, direction, and height, Britain could muster its few fighter planes, its Spitfires, to take off and attack the incoming wave of enemy aircraft. But how do you do that? Well, this is where history books let us all down. They tell this sanitized, cat's eyes eating carrot story of radar, when the real story is still secret. And I want to reveal those secrets to you. So in all the films, the TV programs, and the books you read about Robert Watson Watt and how he developed radar, they're missing out what came first. Watson Watt was a weatherman. He lived in Scotland and he was interested in the ionosphere. He had no connection with the military even. It wasn't until Nikola Tesla tried to sell Chamberlain his death ray, and Britain stole Tesla's plans out of the safe in his bedroom in London and sent him packing, that the wild notion of a directed energy weapon that could defend Britain came to the attention of the Ministry of Defence. And again, your history books let you down. We're told that Tizard and his committee put out a project to see if madcap British shed inventors could boil water at 100 feet using radio waves. Well, I can tell you now, just stop that nonsense, because the British government took it very seriously, and there was a parallel science development. This man, Dr. Hill, worked out how to kill a human using radio frequency. A secret research station in Suffolk at Orford Ness experimented on killing sheep at 100 feet. And none of the British research into directed energy weapons was going well. The reason was Britain didn't pay Nikola Tesla for the full plans. Although they stole them from his safe, the key bits of information to make the Tesla death ray work was only in Tesla's head. And because they hadn't paid him, he went back to America and Britain tried to build it themselves, missing the key points. So in semi-desperation, they asked a weatherman in Scotland who knew about the ionosphere if he could help. Robert Watson Watt was a brilliant guy. He looked at the Tesla death ray problem and said, "It might be possible. Let me have a research station and a bit of a grant, and I'll tell you if I can make it work." So in a classic British way, in a shed or in a few huts, Robert Watson Watt tried to make Tesla's death ray work, and he couldn't. At the time, the sticking point was power. They didn't have the vacuum tubes of high enough output to make RF energy to travel hundreds of miles and kill things. It was never going to work. And here's the first secret I'm going to tell you. Robert Watson Watt dabbled in death rays, but death rays have got nothing to do with radar. In fact, the whole concept of radio beams being modulated by things in the air was already known. BBC engineers knew that their radio transmissions were interfered by aircraft flying through the beam. All the BBC was worried about was how it interfered with their transmitters. And in fact, they contacted the post office to look into it, who confirmed that aircraft flying through an RF signal would make it wobble. And that was the end of the problem. But that wobble was known about, caused by aircraft flying in the sky through an RF beam. So Robert Watson Watt thought that the wobble might be useful. So the first part of radar was looking at the BBC Home Service wobble. Robert Watson Watt didn't even have a radio transmitter, so he used the one at BBC Daventry and organised for a plane, an aircraft, to fly through the beam while he measured if it wobbled. And it did. He got an echo back from the plane when it interfered with the BBC test broadcast. Robert Watson Watt was so excited, even though he didn't have any of the equipment really working, he went straight to London to the Ministry of Defence and said, "I can see a plane flying in the air at a great distance." And they loved the idea. Although Britain had almost no resources, Britain is an island nation. That thin band of sea round the island of Great Britain would buy us time. But it's useless. Having a radio direction finding technique that only gives you 3 minutes. By the time you've scrambled your Spitz, the Germans have dropped their bombs on Lowestoft. The Air Ministry got involved in this secret project and told the Ministry of Defence, "We would need 20 minutes." And that was time to scramble the Spitz and intercept the incoming enemy bombers. And this is my second big secret in this film. Robert Watson Watt was an engineer. He worked in the metric system. And he figured out that his radar, or RDF as he called it, could work at about 150 kilometers. So he told the Ministry of Defence he could see planes 150 km out across the North Sea. You can guess what I'm going to say. The Ministry of Defence thought he meant miles and said, "Jolly good, old chap, over 100 miles. That gives us fighter pilots the time to intercept those Huns." It was more like 40 miles, but Robert Watson was given the chance to increase the range of his system, which he eventually did. What the radar team soon discovered is that a single mast scanning the horizon was no good. But if you could have multiple masts in a chain, you could protect the vulnerable coast of East Anglia and the south coast of England. And the chain home system was built that all had to communicate and share their information. And seconds counted. As soon as a blip turned up, you needed to know its direction, its height, and its speed, so you could scramble your spits. But there was no point in phoning up the airfield and telling them and writing down where it was. No, you needed to get the aircraft up in the air and have a system of telling the lead pilot where to go once he was airborne. And that's how they did it. British fighters would take off not knowing where their target was, and then they were given a heading and a height for an intercept. And here's interesting fact number 3 that I really didn't know. That worked jolly well over the North Sea. You could see those Germans coming over the coast of Germany, which gave you time to scramble and intercept them over the North Sea, where dogfights were way off the coast of Britain. But that was never going to work in the south coast of England. The English Channel is tiny, and that's why we have so many amazing pictures like this. Dogfights over the Garden of England, over Kent, south of London. There just wasn't time to intercept the aircraft over the English Channel. By the time they found them, they were already over Kent. We need to thank Robert Watson Watt for saving British bacon and bringing the world the concept of radar. But all the time a parallel program was going on in the hallowed halls of Cambridge and Oxford. Their mission was to understand the physics of the death ray and possibly exploit it as a military weapon. So I firmly believe by us digging deeply into the annals of radar's history, we begin to uncover a hidden classified truth that leads from Tesla to modern UAP technology. You now know that radar has nothing to do with Tesla's death ray. But we needed to discuss and dismiss radar because it was such an important part of history and fun. But the history of radar served another purpose. It introduced to you two vital places, Bawdsey Manor and Orford Ness. Orford Ness is Britain's most secret weapons test facility. A shingle spit just a few miles north of the secret Bawdsey Manor Radar Research Station. And remember those two names because they're going to play an important role in what really happened at the Rendlesham Forest incident. As a side note, and for your own research, here's a link to a film I made about the secrets of Orford Ness. So welcome back, viewers, to part 2. And let's start by asking, what happened next after radar? Well, the idea of the Tesla death ray was taken very seriously by the UK government and military. But in a typical old boy class privilege network of Britain, Robert Watson Watt was not seen to be the person to take that project forward. Instead, that research was turned over to the top echelons of the British establishment. Cambridge and Oxford universities. This is the late 1930s. The timing was perfect. Rutherford, at the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge was exploring the inner nature of the atom. He was busting the myth that atoms were a plum pudding stuffed full of particles. He devised an audacious experiment by firing alpha particles at solid gold. He looked, waited, and counted all the alpha particles that bounced back. What Rutherford discovered changed history. He described the chances of an alpha particle hitting anything solid was like shooting a fly in a cathedral. This revealed that even the solid material of gold only had a tiny nucleus surrounded by nothing. A great area just populated with a few orbiting electrons. Rutherford revealed that the apparent solidity of gold is only formed by the strength of its electric bonds. This was a turning point in history. The true nature of all matter is just energy. But Rutherford wanted to go further, to delve deeper inside the atom. To do that, he would need to split its bonds to reveal the true nature of stuff. But the forces holding matter together are immense. In France, the same investigation was being carried out by Marie Curie. She used unstable or decaying atoms to delve into their structure. And she called these isotopes radioactive. But radioactivity is potentially lethal, releasing frequencies that can damage life itself. So Rutherford needed another way to split his atom. Along came Nikola Tesla, in my opinion a genius, but born 50 years ahead of his time. His alternating current is one of humanity's best ideas. Tesla argued instead of direct current or DC, where every village, town or factory would need its own power generating plant, AC meant you could have a centralized power station transmitting the power over wires in a grid. DC is terrible at sharing its power. Alternating current was clever stuff, and Tesla knew that he'd made something for the common good of society. But Nikola Tesla wanted to go further and get rid of wires altogether. Wireless power transmission was Tesla's goal. And it works. Look how this neon bulb I'm holding glows when I get near to a wireless Tesla transmission coil. But there's an enormous problem. To make wireless electricity work, Tesla had to produce millions of volts. No transformer can efficiently do that. So he built what I think is his second most important invention, the Tesla coil. It turns low voltages into millions of volts in an ingenious and incredibly simple way. Let me explain. Imagine a low voltage sitting on a swing. By giving it a tiny push at the end of its oscillation, you can make that voltage swing higher and faster. Keep doing it and you can increase the voltage immensely, all with tiny, well-timed pushes. So in Tesla's laboratory, he built these devices that produced millions of volts. The energy was so intense it broke down the bonds of atomic structure. It ionized the air, producing plasma, the fourth state of matter, turning solids into liquids, into gas, and then into plasma, like the interior of a star. This was exactly what Rutherford needed, a way of breaking open reality and splitting the atom. And this all came to pass in Cambridge. The atom was split and the true nature of all matter was revealed. Rutherford described his laboratory's work as unlocking the philosopher's stone. He said, "We are the modern alchemists. We can transmute one element into another." The Cavendish laboratory discovered the ability to turn lead into gold just by altering atomic bonds, by adding or subtracting subatomic building blocks. All known elements, and even new ones, could now, for the first time, be made by man. These quantum leaps in physics redefined our understanding of the universe. But it also unleashed primordial forces, too tempting not to weaponize. British military grabbed this enormous new potential, and for the first time, they understood how Tesla's death ray worked. So what was Tesla's great idea of a death ray? Well, first of all, I define it as a device way ahead of its time, built by a genius who observed an effect, but didn't really understand the true nature of the physics. Tesla hated the term death ray. It was just a sloppy science fiction name coined by the media. He called his device a teleforce and saw it as the ultimate defensive deterrent. What Tesla saw was, under immense power, ordinary matter turned into plasma. And plasma has a unique quality. Just as solids are hard and liquids flow and gases are gaseous, plasma is magnetic. That means that a glowing ball of plasma, or even our sun, is affected by magnetism. Given enough power, he could shoot plasma out of a gun and hit a distant target and destroy it. He imagined his teleforce stations along the borders or coastlines of nations, making an impenetrable barrier against enemy ships or aircraft. As a nuts and bolts man myself, I'm very impressed at the ingenious method that Tesla came up with to let the rays out of the vacuum tube. To accelerate the particles or make the plasma, it had to be done in a vacuum. But the gun fired in the atmosphere. Somehow he had to devise a window to let the plasma out. And he did it by balancing the vacuum against air pressure with this window of pressure. Today we have advanced ceramics and radar transmitters that can hold back a vacuum and transmit into the atmosphere. The defense offered by Teleforce was potentially humanity changing, deterring aggression by the threat of annihilation. But sadly, nobody wanted the death ray. Whether it upset the military balance of power too much, maybe they doubted it really worked, or thought the aging Nikola Tesla was losing his mind, or even more practically, refused to pay Tesla the vast sums that he demanded for the system. In my opinion, I think all of those are true. But secretly, nations dabbled with death rays. France, Germany, Britain, and the US. We later learned that when Tesla was turned down by his favorite nations, he was offered the full price for a working death ray by the Soviet Union, who built one in Siberia. Back in Britain, atomic physics was the cutting-edge field to work in. Top scientists, backed by brilliant electronic engineers, built the most amazing devices. You've probably heard of some of them: magnetrons, synchrotrons, cyclotrons, kylotrons, all the trons. All these devices emerged in this golden age of fundamental physics. And these are all devices inspired or powered by Tesla's inventions, harnessing extreme electrical power to break the bonds of our universe. These advanced machines are not of the physical, not of our normal world, but of a quantum hidden world that redefines reality. These machines tap into and unlock the fundamental building blocks of nature, turning matter into energy, opening Pandora's box and changing your world forever. In Britain, these gadgets were hidden away in secret government establishments, in laboratories under the Malvern Hills, behind the barbed wire at Aldermaston, isolated at the very top of Scotland, hidden away in rural Dumfries and Cumbria, and always tried out on the shingle beach at Orford Ness. This was a new way to wage war, cutting-edge secrets that only now are beginning to emerge from behind the curtain. But the ultimate weapon, invented in Britain, funded by the US and built by private industry, needed testing. On the 26th of December 1980, the location and the victims had been chosen. The Rendlesham incident remains Britain's most witnessed UFO encounter. Starting on the night of December the 26th, 1980, strange lights were seen in the sky and on the ground in a small forest situated in the east of England. What makes this encounter so important? It was seen by multiple US Air Force personnel from the two adjacent bases. The whole incident was documented by the US Air Force, including the base commander, who actually recorded what he saw one night on an audio recorder. But what they saw has never been fully explained and has become the stuff of legend. To try and understand what might have occurred, I'm approaching this mystery by asking two simple questions. What I've discovered is that they unlock a secret world hidden from all of us. So let's start by asking the first question. When did the incident take place? This seems on the surface obvious and innocent. December 1980. But let's dig deeper and see why that date is significant. We are now back in the Cold War. Peace is maintained by a delicate but devastating balance of power, mad or mutually assured destruction.
At this moment, you're in the central part of the United States, over 100 feet below the surface of the Earth, surrounded by thick, reinforced concrete. In the event of an attack, this entire structure can be sealed, protected against penetration of radioactive fallout. Through those doors and around the corner is the operations control room of the Long-Range Air Offense Force. The size, composition, and alertness of the offense force is such that the enemy realizes that an attack on the United States would likely mean committing national suicide.
It is madness, but it's working. The fear of retaliation and hence annihilation hangs over both superpowers. But in the 1970s, this balance has become dangerously unstable. The Soviet Union has been secretly developing directed energy weapons. The US military know about it. and think ultimately their only hope of beating this Soviet superiority would be by launching a preemptive strike. The hawks in the US military are predicting global nuclear war within 5 years.
Attention missile sites. Fire at will on designated targets. Repeat. Fire at will on designated targets.
History now reveals that living in the 1970s was a very dangerous time to be alive.
They have no other choice. We have the air, we have the power. And they know it.
Military science was desperately seeking answers. One far-fetched but possible way was the deployment of exotic military systems being developed in the USA and in the UK. This tension opened a door to new, wild ideas. One came from the father of the hydrogen bomb, Edward Teller. He was doorstepping politicians with his idea for a nuclear-powered X-ray laser that he claimed could shoot down missiles in flight. For many years, Teller had the ear of the governor of California. When he became president, Reagan ran with the idea of building a strategic defense shield, pouring billions of dollars into research and sharing those funds with the one country that had advanced military physics systems, the UK. Since World War II, Britain has secretly developed exotic military physics at places like Aldermaston, the so-called bomb factory, hidden in the hills at Malvern, an early incarnation of this, the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory near Didcot. And I think work secretly continued into exotic weapons at Bawdsey Manor, right next door to Britain's test site at Orford Ness, also in Suffolk. At this time, the UK's Defence Secretary, Michael Heseltine, welcomed these funds. UK private industry benefited greatly. This American funding meant that UK's defence contractors could work on their novel ideas. BAE Systems had a team looking at gravity modification, Project Greenglow. Marconi worked on computer targeting control systems, and high-energy plasma research was being carried out at the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. The Western world now had a new strategic alliance. Reagan and Thatcher both collaborating on a brave new world, the world of Star Wars. Well, that was your long answer to the question, when? But I hope it shines a bigger light on that date of December the 26th, 1980. So my second big question seems also irrelevantly innocent, but turns out to be very revealing. Where did the UFO sightings occur? Well, that's very easy. A small British forest of planted pine trees sandwiched between two ex-RAF bases now occupied by the US Air Force. In 1980, Woodbridge. It's the base of the US North Atlantic Space Recovery Wing and a secure hiding space for US offshore nuclear warheads. Of course, heavily guarded by the US, but an enclave on British soil. Bentwaters, it's a tactical fighter base, also with nuclear weapon handling capabilities and surrounded by a very secure perimeter fence. Both bases are under the control of USAF, US Air Force Europe, based in Germany, and have special rules about operating in the UK. Base personnel are free to move about Britain, but no military activity off base is permitted on British soil. Military liaison with the US Star Wars project in Britain is most likely between James Abrahamson and Roy Dommett. Abrahamson runs SDI for the US. Dommett runs the UK's Advanced Military Research Headquarters based at Farnborough. What exactly the UK have built and are offering the US is still unknown. But it's time to test it with US Air Force support. My second question, where, also reveals a new truth. Let me show you something on a map. This is Bawdsey Manor Lab. This is Orford Ness Test Range. This is the Martlesham Heath Laboratory. Whatever it was the British had built, it needed serious power. No problem. Britain has Sizewell A nuclear power station just a few miles up the coast from Orford Ness. And the US oversight, probably a team flown in from Wright-Patterson into Bentwaters Air Force Base. Follow these lines. An intersection on this map of Suffolk suddenly becomes clear. On British soil, isolated and sparsely populated, sandwiched between two heavily guarded US bases, this is Rendlesham Forest. Hey viewers, I want to break out from this storytelling timeline that I'm presenting to you and share what I think really happened. Bawdsey Manor and possibly other British laboratories had developed an advanced weapons system using Orford Ness to fire it, using the advanced computer control system at Martlesham Heath, with US Air Force military oversight from Bentwaters, and drawing all the power it would need from Sizewell A nuclear power station just a few miles up the coast. And where better to test an advanced British physics weapon than in a rural forestry commission piece of land between two US Air Force bases. The system was turned on the night of Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, by Bawdsey from Orford Ness, controlled by Martlesham and under the supervision of Bentwaters, and a glowing ball of whatever it was appeared over this sparsely populated British part of the land, Rendlesham Forest, attracting the attention either intentionally or by mistake of the two US Air Force bases on either side of the test zone. And personally, I think they also knew that there was a great potential health danger to any personnel who got too close to ionizing radiation or high-level plasma, which is probably what they were testing and accounts for what people saw and how it affected them. Anywho, that's my personal idea. A British device tested on British soil, sandwiched between two US Air Force bases, and as we'll learn later, sadly affecting the health of the witnesses on that fateful night. Let's go back now to the rest of the film because I've got more information to share with you. While researching plasma physics, I was told one of the hard things to make a system work was the amount of power it required. But maybe having Sizewell A nuclear power station up the road might just help a bit. To answer that question, I asked the current press officer from Sizewell Nuclear Power Station about the output of Sizewell A on the night of the 26th of December 1980. She never got back to me. So I asked the CEGB, the Central Electricity Generating Board, to provide to me all the power interconnects in the county of Suffolk. I got a polite answer telling me that that type of information was no longer publicly available since 9/11. Not to be put off by my unhelpful friends, I asked a man who knows what lies beneath the shingle bank at Orford Ness. He has a CEGB plan from that time showing massive wires coming from Sizewell and appearing under Orford Ness. Today, these wires still emerge from the beach. Next to this place, the Black Tower, a building with a history of sheltering advanced military secrets behind its wooden walls, protecting whatever lay inside the building from the miserable North Sea weather. Bentwaters today is an industrial estate. One of the old US Air Force hangars is now a film company, who told me they found massive power cables underneath their hangar, much larger than any conventional airport would need, strangely pointing in the direction of Sizewell and Martlesham Heath. Bawdsey might also be on this power grid, but finding what really lies underneath Bawdsey Manor is proving tricky. Many people have helped me, thank you, with researching this project for over 3 years, and some have distanced themselves from my meddling questions. I can tell you now that this design of British cottage is actually the guardhouse to an underground complex, a secret Cold War communication hub for submarines, along with its sister site at RAF Edsall in Scotland. So there's some fascinating answers by asking the simple questions: when and where? Whatever you think really happened at Rendlesham Forest, I hope what I have told you adds to your arsenal of knowledge. But there's more. Another piece of this jigsaw, a deeply disturbing piece. Whatever took place on those fateful nights, exposure to the strange things they encountered injured some of the witnesses. And the shocking truth that their injuries were covered up, leaving some of the victims untreated. This appalling misjustice was sanctioned from the top in the US, trying to hide the truth from all of us. The same cover-up was tried in the UK, planting media stories about them seeing the flashing Orford lighthouse, or even claiming the whole thing was a prank by the SAS. When Margaret Thatcher was confronted by UFO researcher Georgina Bruni, her reply reveals a Prime Minister either fully aware or briefed on what really had happened at Rendlesham. UFOs? You must get your facts right. And you can't tell the people. Whatever happened at Rendlesham Forest, it is possibly the most important encounter with strange forces ever to occur in Britain. Out of the blue, a friend of one of the airmen exposed at Rendlesham Forest said John Burroughs likes my films and wants to talk. So I set up a Zoom call, and John's answers about what happened those fateful nights is fascinating. My first question tonight to you, John, is did you feel odd effects immediately?
I didn't feel good afterwards.
Right.
And at one point my mouth even turned white. My gums turned white.
Right.
I wrote a little bit. But I went into the doctors. They said I had a virus. They gave me some medicine, but the big holdup is my heart, because I'm still to this day, which again is these armchair veterans and stuff. The VA granted my disability. They granted it based off that I was injured at Rendlesham Forest. They verified that I was injured during the incident, and they granted me disability based on the incident. They never said what happened, including that's what happened with Kyle and McCain both. They said there's no doubt something happened. There's no doubt I was injured, but I'm never going to get an answer on what it was.
But maybe there were answers. The British MOD commissioned an RAF scientist to study the UK UAP reports. To answer the question, do they pose a threat to national security? This is Project Condign. It has a whole section on the Rendlesham incident and links the symptoms of the US Air Force personnel to a Canadian study that looked at electromagnetic exposure and standing too close to plasma. Here is a list of its findings. Experience number 1, felt dizzy or odd. 2, felt presence of someone or something. 3, tingling. 4, saw vivid images. But what struck me is this. Why would there be a study into plasma exposure unless plasma weapons were planned to be used? The UK Condign report became vital evidence for John's disability claim. When you read the published pre-Rendlesham symptoms published in the Condign report, did they resonate with you, with your symptoms?
The whole report resonated with me. And that was a really strange thing too, because I didn't know about it, and I found out, was it Coxford that happened? I met Pope during that early time frame.
Sure.
And he had talked about some stuff, and he never brought up Coxford. And I found out about Coxford, so I sent him an email. I said, "What else haven't you talked about?" He says, "Well, go on the MOD website and look at Project Condign." But the interesting thing about Pope was he wrote about Condign, but he never talked about, in the documents, it stated that we were exposed to UAP radiation.
It does, clearly.
I don't know if you saw that. It said that right. So he never talked about that ever until we wrote the book.
Right.
And he really didn't want to go into Condign much. He just told me, he said, "Well, that'll come out as it goes, but I have a security oath, blah, blah, blah."
Right. No, I understand that. But so if I press you in this, do you think that whatever you were exposed to is the same as the Condign report symptoms? I mean, the specific one that resonated with me is time dilation and confusion and physical symptoms and depression.
Yeah, you saw Jacques Vallée's.
Yes,
that's what he told me.
Jacques Vallée is a French scientist who studied UAP exposure on humans throughout the world. Vallée claims that the human body is changed by those events, right down to our DNA level. How human DNA is affected after a UAP encounter is ongoing research, and they wanted John to give a sample.
They approached me for my DNA, and he did an evaluation on me. He wanted my DNA, and I told him no. And they kept pressing me, and I kept saying, "Look, here's the deal. Until I get, first of all, figured out what's wrong with me, and I get treated because I was dying." And I says, "I'm not even talking to you." And I said, "Even then, if I get that, I'm still not going to do anything with anybody until I get compensated, because I can't work anymore."
That was my shocking thing when reading the Condign report, is that the symptoms that they described from extreme electromagnetic or plasma exposure was done in the 1960s. So somebody was interested in human exposure before, so there must have been.
It was done before that. The reason why radar was developed was because the death ray was being worked on at Orford Nest.
Right.
And they discovered the radar, and they've been working on this since the 40s.
Absolutely.
But they were starting to see effects because radar was becoming widely used. So they were trying to understand it.
Right.
And this would be the next Agent Orange, which
Right.
they don't want out on top of everything else, because all these people were like the two guys I was sitting next to had cancer, and they were pretty sure it came from the radar systems they were working on the fighter
Right.
planes.
Right. And just
But
imagine it. Right.
But that was all blacked out. So they were having trouble getting VA compensation from it.
The potential number of claims by U.S. service personnel exposed to radar would be enormous. That could well explain why John had delays in getting his disability claim approved. But all the time, his health was deteriorating. Hang on. At this point in the interview, I sensed that John wanted to stop telling me about him and wanted to start telling me about what he knew about how the US and the UK collaborate on secret projects.
After the Vietnam papers got released and all the MK Ultra with the CIA doing all that, they were shutting it all down, and the American government moved it through SAP programs over to Britain. Also, because Britain also had all the top technology and radars and lasers, because those blue lights that we saw were probably plasmas being targeted by lasers. They were generating the phenomenon, which was probably what they were hitting was the actual phenomenon, the exposure, what they created from blasting this energy field.
Right.
And they were targeting it. So at the time, though, when we were there, we were like, what the hell is this shit? We didn't know. I mean, there was no air. The airfield was behind us, not in front of us. And it was like, well, we've never seen her interact with any stuff. So, what else can it be? I never really said it was aliens. I just said,
no, it's unknown. But the US Air Force and the British MOD, by using Rendlesham, would have known that the possible exposure, the possible dangers of the exposure to you and your
Yeah, well, that's a big question. Okay, now here's the thing. Night one, I don't know if they purposely were trying. There had been stuff going on and been seen before that. If you go back and do the history, there have been weird stuff going on for weeks before. People had seen stuff and commented on it, and nobody really did anything with it. On our particular night, we got clearance to go off base because radar saw something disappear. And the shift commander, I don't know, he clammed up when I challenged him when he first tried to say we were making a bigger deal out of it. I said, well, why did we go off base? And he basically shut up then, because he got authorization. They contacted Eastern Radar, our RABCON, and everything else. And there was something there above that came into the forest.
Right.
And what ended up happening is we went out and got close to it. I don't think normally we would never have left the base. I mean, that night, it just was, we got clearance to go. So that's when we got close to it. Then the next night, more stuff happened.
Right.
And that was then by night 3, they were on full.
Right.
Now, I don't think at the time, because I met with Williams on about 3 occasions, I don't think they knew what was taking place outside the gate.
John thinks what happened was man-made and points the finger at a large over-the-horizon radar facility at Orford Ness, Cobra Mist. On this aviation chart, you can clearly see that Cobra Mist lines up exactly with Woodbridge runways. That radar was plagued by problems. The Orford Ness facility was never fully functional, and strangely, the weird interference seemed to be coming from the Rendlesham Forest area. This was so mysterious that a team from Stanford University in California were called in to investigate. The Stanford investigators, known as SRI, have clearance to work on secret government projects. John told me that whatever was interfering with the Cobra Mist radar became the center of interest for the SRI team, who carried out high-energy physics experiments using orphaned nests from their new headquarters in a restricted area of Bentwaters Air Force Base.
SRI came in when they shut down, what was it, Cobra Mist?
Cobra Mist.
They determined that there was inland interference that was causing Cobra Mist not to work. Now, I think that's one of the reasons why they thought the Soviets may have been doing this, even because the interesting thing was SRI stayed, and they stayed at Martlesham Heath, and then they also, some of them were working off the base. There was a classified area on the flight line that no one could have access to.
Right. And those were the Cobra Mist SRI people.
Those were the people that came in to find out what was wrong with Cobra Mist. He told me in messages that he was down there studying the phenomenon, and on our night that we went out there, they were blasting the phenomenon with EM frequencies from Bowsy through the tunnels into the forest.
Cobra Mist got turned off and cancelled almost by overnight. You'd have thought that they could have fixed it. You could have thought that it would have been a longer process, and suddenly it's off, but all the people stayed.
Well, not all, but some. I mean, It wasn't like everybody that came in, but they did keep people there, and then they brought people in. And then Marconi was down there too.
Right.
And I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's factual that several of the scientists who were down there were working on SDI. They were working at Martlesham Heath on SDI. And 3 or 4 of them died mysteriously. They claimed that they were committed suicide. But the actual word I got was the Soviets knocked them off.
Seems to me that there's a lot went on connecting Bawdsey Manor, Alford Ness, and Martlesham. That's a number of people have contacted me talking about high levels of electromagnetic radiation and plasma, and they're saying it doesn't work because of the power levels required, but it's certainly helpful to have a nuclear power station 2 miles up the coast.
It does work. They're doing it right now in the United States. They're doing it in these areas. Matter of fact, they've condensed the generation abilities now that they're using it in those ships and the Navy ships.
Right.
And if you notice where the Nimitz incident happened, and I think it was the Lincoln or whatever, the one off the East Coast, the Nimitz was down there in Catalina Island, and they have all that equipment down there. And they have an energy source. Then the other one happened in 16 was right off the coast of Florida, which is where they work on all the stealth technology and stuff. The radars can be manipulated so you see things that you don't. Number 2, and if you took a plasma and put it out there and the fighter pilot thought it was a threat, they would fire on it, it would dissipate, and then the missile would come back and blow the airplane up.
Right.
And they can also use the plasmas to protect. Puthoff's working on a project right now to cloak a tank.
Right.
Where the plasmas will cloak the tank, and actually the shell can go through it and not damage the tank. The problem they're having is it doesn't show up, like it's supposed to go forward and then it shows up somewhere else instead of when they cloak it. And they can't put a human in it.
Right.
Because it'll kill a human. It's not a slow effect, it's an immediate, like what kind of happened to me. The only reason I live supposedly is because I had 2 leaflets in my valve.
Right.
So they both were damaged, but they stayed together for years. They kept me from dying almost instantaneously. Then the other guy that was with me on the 3rd night, he got 100% too now.
Right.
He was the one that partially went into it. I went completely into it. You saw me go into it.
Right.
So, but again, there's a fine line between what we were working on and what is a UAP.
Quite.
And what does it really do for military applications? Because that's why this is being kept secret.
My impression is that this technology has now matured greatly.
Because of computer abilities,
right,
quantum, and because they've been able to develop the energy sources.
Exactly.
The small enough compartmentalized to do it. And even in airplanes, they can generate it.
Right.
I asked the DOD about if they developed a weapon off or were developing a weapon off the UAP, it's in there. And their comment back was the kitchen sink of why they couldn't tell me. They said, yes, they had, but it was foreign relations, enemy, giving out information. When they did the hearing, that question was asked, and
Right.
it said that we won't comment publicly. We'll go behind closed doors.
For everyone seeking answers to what might have really happened in Rendlesham Forest, this interview was an eye-opener. It ties together all the loose ends that have intrigued me for years. That a Tesla death ray was being secretly developed in the UK, how radar emerged as a parallel application, that it was Star Wars funding that opened doors to military applications for advanced physics. But the biggest mystery is what really stopped the Cobra Mist Orford Ness over-the-horizon radar from working. What did Stanford research discover about a strange phenomenon that seems to exist in the Rendlesham Forest area? And what were they doing in 1980 that unleashed an unknown force? John Burroughs wants to make this very clear and issued this statement. Whatever I encountered, I don't believe it was man-made. I believe it was man testing our technology on a phenomenon to better understand how to use it in weaponization. We are all so privileged to hear this from John Burroughs because he was really there and he really understands the backstory to what was going on. Sadly, he and others encountered the unknown and were hurt by it. I hope John and other veterans get the settlement and healthcare they deserve and receive continuing medical support for their injuries that occurred those fateful nights in Rendlesham Forest. The truth is out there.